So, are you going to reform your language? In terms of jazz, there's got to be ADOS. It's not black.
The trouble with me is that I do stuff. I will go. Let's take this position, see what happens, see what we learn. And the black one was I being British. Um, I got friends who were black. I talked to them about it, and they were going. They totally agreed with me. You know.
What?
So I
Yeah,
didn't
of course,
quite.
because they're not ADOS, and so they're happy to get jazz brought into their field, but they got nothing to do with it. That's you can see how the ADOS folk are saying, no, no, it's not you fucking Nigerians and all this, Jamaicans and whatnot. It's us descendants of slaves and the Creoles. It's got nothing to do with fucking Jamaicans and Johnny come lately black immigrants from other parts of the world.
But on the other side of that is like when people are claiming black ancestry, as I said on one of the comments, is that if you go back to the time of the slave period, one person will have 1,000 grandparents, right?
Sure.
So if you take the 41 million black people in America and go back, you would have to have 41 billion slaves in America. Right. Now, the thing is, I'm mixed race. I'm as white as it can be, but in my family, there's mixed race people. And so I'm very aware that mixed race is you've got this blend, and some people are catching racism, and some people are, I never catch any racism. My mom did when she was young, really bad. And so you start to see how this works, and you see the nuances of that. Right. Everybody in America, they're all one lot of people, all descended. Right. And so you start to argue about genes. Well, look at the way I look. I'm black, so I've obviously got more genes than somebody there. But when you come from mixed race, and Ben and my mate Sean Corby and a few other people, I think the reason why we react against it because we've got mixed race connections, and you start to see it differently. Then this guy's Rick rang up me. He messaged me today, and he's a he look. I thought he was a black guy, and he's working in African music, but he's actually Polynesian. And he says, he goes, all I get is he goes, the thing where you're right, Andy, is he said, the people who created jazz, they were outsiders. He said, that is
Yeah.
what it is. He goes, I've been an outsider all my life. And that's what musicians are. And outsiders cross the tracks. And all new music is a fusion of different things. And so,
Sure.
so anybody saying, we've got this port in America where the segregation thing is a little bit relaxed, still going on, but it's a little bit relaxed, right? It's a port city, right? You've got all these different people going in, and the only thing that happened was black people transmitted stuff to white people. Nothing came back the other way.
Well, no, but nobody's saying that, are they?
No. So then, if that's the case, right? That's the first thing. Is that jazz? To understand it, you have to go. It's a fusion of all the cultures in New Orleans, all of them. And then you start to go, well, so is that why all the instruments are European? Yeah. Is that why it sounds like marching music? Yeah. Is that why the African influences aren't there? Because there aren't African influences there. I can't hear it myself. Right. So there's all those things you start to look at it, and it demeans because people like Sonny Rollins, all these people that turned around and said jazz is not a black music form, never do that. It's because they were highly sophisticated musicians. They were just incredible musicians. Right now, I say black music, black musicians. I've said it all my life to students. I said your groove's not black enough, right? And I understand what that is, all right. But by the same token, I have had it where I used to work with rappers, and I never could do the gig because I was white. My groove was way past any of those black drummers in Birmingham, because I'd grown up listening to James Brown. That is what all I ever listened to. That's what, but I was, well, and I teach people who are black to drums, and they've got no natural rhythm. It's just racist to say all this. It's not. It's in the musicians, but it's not in the people. And when people are on that YouTube, I do get really annoyed by it. When they sat there going, "You can't take the music off us. It's our music. We created it." I feel like you did not create it, mate. You didn't create it. Some people created it in New Orleans. They were probably mostly black, but half of them thought they were white. The Creoles thought they were white. And
And,
Sidney Bechet,
and
you read the interview with Sidney Bechet, he's going, the Ku Klux Klan are great. They're going to get the black people under control. They're giving us all a bad name in New Orleans. The situation there, I've studied it so deeply, and you cannot say I don't. So Ben McInnes really believes that there's a Native American. I don't know the truth. I gave him a chance to talk about it. I don't know. But as soon as you say that, it's like people are going for you. Now, what I don't understand is the tinderbox of race in America. That's what I, because I'm British. You know, so all my friends who are black, then when they saw the comments, I had a message. They're going, "Why are they making assumptions about you for, Andy? How dare you go white British man? They could, you know, they don't know whether you're white or not. That's an English thing, you know. We're all individuals. You can't put it in a
By
box."
the color of your skin, it's the color of the skin.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really huge topic that could go on for hours in its own right. But in Australia, it's a big issue about Aboriginality in terms of what makes an Aboriginal, right? Because unlike, say, Indians in America, there's no the record keeping was pretty non-existent, for most of the time. So there's no database of where people came from and whatnot, and so it's a question of is it if you feel Aboriginal, are you Aboriginal, or do you have to, or if you live in an Aboriginal community, does that make you Aboriginal, like because blood is only a very limited use, because of the lack of records and et cetera, et cetera. So, it's the same sort of argument as what constitutes blackness, what constitutes, whiteness, all of this sort of stuff.
What people want to try and start doing is focusing on actual racism, because all this stuff, actually you start to forget what actual racism is, right? That's the problem. It's like at my college there was two black lecturers. The government comes up with a directive and they said all lecturers have got to be checked to see whether they're British citizens. Now, did they go and ask for my passport? No. But they went up to the two black lecturers and asked for their passports.
Holy shit.
Right. And the thing is, they're British. They're British. And I get upset because I'm like going, no, they're British. Because to be British is nothing to do with the colour.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with the colour. The most right-wing anti-immigrant person on my Facebook is Sonny Mahindra, mate of mine. And you go on there, he's got Union Jacks, and he's going, they're not right, letting all these immigrants in, and all this type of stuff. But my mom's an immigrant, and she says the same thing to me.
Of course, yeah.
She turns around to me, and goes, well, because we had a big thing in the UK with the Windrush, because suddenly people lost their citizenship because of the Windrush thing. And my mum said, yeah, I remember that. It's because you had to register. My mum had to register me. If you didn't do it, then you didn't get registered as a citizen, and that's what happened to a lot of the Windrush. So she goes, in the end, they just didn't get it done, did they? And that's my mom, who's an immigrant, saying her version of it. And she said, it gets on my nerves because we managed to get our act together and get it sorted out.
But that's everywhere in the world. Every country that has immigrants, the most recent batch of immigrants always want to pull the drawbridge up and stop.
Yeah, of course they do. Because what it is we have some people are conservative, and conservative means you look to the past and you want to conserve the things that you think's good. And then there's other people who are progressive and they want to break the rules. Now, I'm actually a rule breaker. Terrible. I'm a contrarian rule breaker. So I will go on and say, I don't know if jazz is black because I want to see what happens. I'm a contrarian. I'm a progressive person. I'm not conservative at all. But what I'm finding now is that what we call progressive has become the big dogmatic ideology, and it can't be questioned. And as soon as you question it, the people are going to go for you, right? And like John Lydon last night comes out and he goes, I want to talk to you about white privilege. And then he'd tell you this story about him growing up. And it was awful. And he would go, fucking white privilege. And everyone would cheer. You see? And he is voicing something that if this ideology doesn't get checked, there will be a right-wing. I dread it. I absolutely dread it. And what I saw on YouTube in the comments towards me just seemed like race essentialism. They sounded like the Ku Klux Klan, but a black version of it. They were arguing for racial purity, for genes, for their ownership of what their ancestors did because of their genes and their blood, which doesn't exist. Like in Harry Potter, when they go, oh, you're not pure blood. That is what is going on, and yet when you say it, you know that you're going to get labelled the racist for saying it.
And they'll share all the comments, and they just want TikTok ticks, don't they?
I think people get genuinely angry, and the reason why they get genuinely angry is because it's not about someone saying a different opinion. It's about somebody actually daring to not toe what they think is absolutely morally correct.
Yeah.
That's the bit I don't like, because when Rosa Parks said, "I'm not going to get, I'm not getting up and do that," she was completely going against the thing. They would have thought, how dare she do that? They would have been angry with her. She was a heretic. That's
Totally.
what did it, and they've all become it, right? And the jazz narrative over the last 40 years has completely changed it. So you could go back and you find that there's jazz musicians, great jazz musicians saying, never think that jazz is black music. It's more than black music. Black people, and I said this over and over again, black people did all the heavy lifting. They're the ones who, they're all the geniuses are black, blah, 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 right? But it's not a black music, because no music is a black music and no music's a white music. If somebody said to me, well, classical music's white, I go, Beethoven's biggest influence was a French black man. So I ain't going to call it white, because you deny that, and it has to be said. If you're interested in history and the nuances of it all, now the thing that they don't want to admit is in New Orleans there was a ton of white marching bands, right? Black people got involved in that and they made it cool. That is true, but the black people took the white marching bands, and what they say, yeah, but just that let's deny that. And when you look at it historically, and you look at the rags that Scott Joplin was doing, you look at the minstrel groups, you put all that together. It's greater than the sum of its parts. And if you want to explain the history of it, you have to get around the Ken Bird's dogma, because that was funded for millions of pounds to tell a certain story. And you end up with Wynton Marsalis sat there in the Lincoln Center, and I love Wynton, and he doesn't think that jazz is black music, right? But he sat there on $2 million a year, based upon the idea that this black classical music. And so all the musicians I like Alan Holdsworth and Scott Henderson, they are living on nothing, because they are not part of that. Right, and it's nothing to do with race, it's to do with this idea of black classical music. And Nicholas Payton is pushing that, because they're all from privileged families in New Orleans. Their parents are all in jazz groups. They had access to everything. They were in big famous jazz groups when they were 9 years old. They're incredibly talented, but that's what they had. They went to music college, they got access to all that sort of stuff, and they've got careers. If you grow up in Birmingham and you're a jazz musician, forget it. Black or white, forget it. They're privileged. Right, got no problem with it, but at least say it. But don't come up with your black American music, because what it's doing is it's trying. And Branford Marsalis fell out with him, and he said it. He goes, he's territory grabbing. That's what he's doing. I don't like it at all, and it's going to make things worse. So what you saw when I said that was that video, that guy, the stuff they were saying about me, and then he then did a video about Ben McKinnon, and Ben McKinnon messaged me, and he goes, "Oh my God, they just called me a devil, like a white devil." He was upset. Think about, if you get called that, you love jazz, you love black people, you've done documentaries, champion them, interview them, you're out there doing, black women in jazz, you're doing all that stuff, but that doesn't matter. You get called a devil.
The sad part about it, these people, they get into positions where they can change Wikipedia writings and change in history. Then obviously our kids will believe it. Because
they've got control of the universities, the colleges. Oh, that's what's happened here. Is that in the humanities and the arts, it's based upon philosophy, right? And there's two types of philosophy. There's the English American philosophy, there's continental philosophy, and they're completely opposed. And what you need is both, and they complement each other, and that's how philosophy works. But the critical theorists, they didn't see philosophy like that. They said, if you want to challenge these power structures, you have to indoctrinate in the universities, right? Chairman Mao took that on in China, and he had, the Red Army, which was a bunch of kids, and they were trained. This is what didn't happen in Russia. That's why China's still there. It's the indoctrination. I've got no problem with postmodernism. I know quite a lot about it, and some of it I think is amazing. I always knock it, but it's when you make that ideological and you can't challenge it. And so the phenomenologists who say that truth, there isn't a truth, there is just your personal truth. And people like Heidegger came out with a theory that was like blanket, phenomenon. Now Heidegger was the Nazis' philosopher, but everyone chooses to ignore that. But that's who Heidegger was. But that is what you're hearing. Is if everyone says, "Well, that's my truth and that's it," and it's I don't like it, and I've challenged it for the last 30 years. I haven't just arrived at this. I challenged it when I was a kid at art college. I don't like it, and I think it's because my mom's Indian. And I never had any racism. And my mum would tell me stuff. She'll tell me that all the time. You go, that's terrible. That is terrible what you had happen to you. And you realise it's not going to be solved by this. What this is not, that doesn't solve it. She shouldn't have been treated based upon the colour of her skin. But when you say that, apparently to say that is racist now. And it's unbelievable but that is the case.
It's interesting what you're saying. It's almost a parallel to the anti-woke movement. Like, in a way, you're saying similar things, but coming at it from like completely opposite directions. But you both kind of get into.
Because the whole anti-woke thing is that it's like people are turning around and go, "Oh, you're doing right-wing talking points," right? I believe I am in the middle, and I take the good stuff from the right and the good stuff from the left, right? It's like if I'm talking to a socialist, I know Marxist Ben Watson, who I had on the channel, I chat to him all the time. He's a full-on Marxist, like Leninist, Marxist-Leninist. And we chat all the time. When I'm talking to him, I start going over to the left.
Of course, yeah.
And then when I talk to my more right-wing friends, I go over to the right. That's what I'm like. I go all the way around it.
Well, actually, I would have thought you'd be the opposite. That you'd take the opposition to whatever your friends are saying, just for the fun of it.
I'll do that because I will take the opposite because I want to have the argument so that I can work out what's right or wrong, and then I cherry pick it at the end of that, And I have changed my opinion, and I can tell you what I've thought about the black music. I've thought it's probably best to call it black music because I don't want to upset black people. Out of civility, if they're really that bothered and they think that I'm trying to steal jazz off them in Kidderminster, I'm going to grab the jazz off. And all the black people in America wake up one day, they go, "Where's the jazz? Andy Edwards has got it in Kidderminster. Oh, I told you he was going to have it. What's he doing with it? Oh, awful things. Awful things he's doing with it. He's put Duran Duran in there. He's got like Black Sabbath, all these Birmingham bands. It's awful.
He's making it all white. Yeah.
Eating pork scratchings. It's all gone wrong. I don't get what they, when they say this. Oh, you're trying to take it off us. You're trying to take it off. I got nothing to do with jazz. I'm the one that jazz. When I love jazz, I went into the UK jazz scene and it put its big door up against me. Literally, I got stitched up over and over again by the jazz elite, which I was trying to get in there over and over again. People going back. I got auditions for groups, and then people go, they don't get Andy Edwards in. Why? He's not a proper jazz drummer. Not a proper jazz drummer.
His chops are way too
mean, anyway.
There was one group called Svengali in Birmingham, and it was like a Gil Evans tribute band, and they had like Andy Shepherd and Courtney Pine in at one point, and they needed a drummer. I knew some of the guys. I got the gig, and then some of those guys then went to say, "Don't get Andy in." So they got this other kid in, all right? That kid was my student. But they were going around saying, Andy can't play, he can't do this, he can't do that. You know why? Because I was a fusion guy. And I cracked the joke on my channel on that. I mean, a lot of what I'm doing has got ulterior motives. Mark Mondesir is the greatest drummer to come out of the UK, as far as I'm concerned. He's incredible. He's the only one without an OBE of the classic Courtney Pine British jazz group. Courtney Pine's got an OBE, Gary Crosby's got an OBE, Julian Joseph's got an OBE, Mark hasn't. Why? Because Mark played with international fusion guys like John McLaughlin and Jeff Beck, so he doesn't get the OBE. That's what I'm reacting at. It's not about, that's what I don't like.
Who decides if there's
on
some
that video,
committee?
if you watch it, I'm championing it, and I say, and people, if they actually look at what I'm saying, because I do work these things out, I said, Mark's the greatest drummer. He's absolutely, he never got an OBE. And I said, and so I'm championing him because he's so amazing. And then I go, but it's really bad because Mark's my mate. And now he's going to find out I'm a racist. And Mark was walking down with the headphones on, listening to it. And he said he couldn't stop laughing when I said it. Now, if that bit doesn't totally blow up the whole thing that's going on, right? Because Mark Mondesi is one of the greatest jazz drummers in the world, and he's British. And all British jazz musicians have a chip on their shoulder because they're not American.
It is by committee, Sasha, by the way.
I mean, not just jazz musicians, but probably that was the early days of British, rock or pop. Like probably the Beatles and the Stones had chips on their shoulders because they weren't black either.
Yeah, everybody does. I love black musicians. The trouble is I don't. When I look at a musician, like one of the great black musicians, I have respect for them, right? And I know they got their black heritage. I know all that's in there, and I respect all that. But it's the way it channels through them, and the way it channels through them is it's sublime because it's even greater than that. And that's what you feel with jazz. When black people invented jazz, let's say that's what happened. When they invented that, it went out into the world and opened everybody. It's the same thing as the punk thing. It's the thing I love about music. So someone like Django Reinhardt, he's an outsider, but he's a different outsider. And gypsy jazz, Django Reinhardt, is the same as Duke Ellington and Count Basie and Louis Armstrong. It's all the same. Big Spiderbeck, all the same. And the thing is, Artie Shaw, Benny Goodman, those groups are as great as your Count Basies and your Duke Ellingtons. I know you're not allowed to say it, but Benny Goodman, what that band did,
sure,
because Benny hired Charlie Christian, and Charlie Christian invented the electric guitar. It's rock and roll, and all of it wouldn't happen without Charlie Christian. He had Gene Krupa. Gene Krupa was the first pop star, and Gene Krupa was the first person to play a proper drum kit. Everyone was playing stuff with gongs on it and drums with tic tacs on the side. And then he came out and he had a proper drum kit that you could tune, and he had two toms and he had a two. Gene Krupa invented that. Nobody else, right? That's Benny Goodman. Benny Goodman is an incredible clarinet player, and when I hear him, he swings as hard as anybody else. What is going on that we have to try and demote them? The Ken Burns thing, and keep saying all the time that Benny Goodman was, he was taken for black musicians. But Louis Armstrong, he couldn't play with Big Spiderbeck. They used to have secret jams together because Louis was. You can't say Louis wasn't taken from Bix because Bix was the new guy on the block. That's why Louis was there. He wasn't there just to show off. He was taken from Bix. You see, it goes both ways. It's like I would say it's probably 80% black. If you count the Creole bit.
But don't you have to differentiate between, if you're talking about foundation stories, that's a matter of historical truth. It is,
No, it's not, because nobody knows. Nobody bothered to keep any records. We don't know. So here's something no one ever says. In 1917, they record the original Dixieland Jazz Band. We have no idea what jazz sounds like before then. That record goes out. It was recorded in New York. It's a novelty record. but it doesn't act like a novelty record. It goes and sells 2 million copies. So the record companies go, oh my God, record some of that. Now, all those bands in New Orleans, they could have all sounded like the original Dixieland Jazz Band, and the original Dixieland Jazz Band copied it from black people. That's the narrative, right? What if they all sounded different? And when the original Dixieland Jazz Band had that hit, they went, oh, okay then. Yeah, we'll do that. Because in the history of jazz and blues, that's happened every single time, not the other way round. So you go, well, original Dixieland Jazz Band, they were formed in 1905 and they came out of Papa Jack Lane's band that goes back to about 1894. We can't go back any further than that. And then you read an interview with Louis Armstrong and Louis there saying they were the greatest band in New Orleans in 1905. All right? Now, this doesn't mean that black people did, and they obviously took from black people and all that. I'm not saying that. But if you discount it and you just say, oh, they just copied black people and it was that they wouldn't sign, they were trying to sign black artists. It's all not true. And the trouble is, we don't know what happens really when we go back. They don't know where the name jazz comes from. They don't know what the early groups sounded like. They don't even know who the early groups were. If you look on the census for New Orleans in 1900, there's 7 professional black musicians in New Orleans.
But I guess the point is that once you release it into the wild, so to speak, that record comes out, you know, lots of people start hearing it. At that stage, kind of all bets are off. It's everybody's music, right? You know, some white folk heard it, some, you know, blah, blah, blah. So,
well, if you get rid of the narrative that you have, if you take that away, right? So you take Leadbelly, right? When they signed him, they tried to market it as a Delta Blues. He wasn't a Delta Blues artist. He was a folk artist singing all these folk songs. That's the shock about Leadbelly. Doesn't sound like Robert Johnson, right? He sounds like everything. He's doing nursery rhymes, children's songs, everything, right? When he was signed, they tried to get him to do Delta Blues. It wasn't a success. Later on, they let him, and that was the intellectual Jewish New York, you know, middle class. They started to support him to do the folk songs, and then he was really important and invented all the music in the 20th century, as I've described before with Lonnie Donegan, and it all goes all the way through. And he even invented woke that we're talking about, right? Did the whole lot. It was absolute genius, right? Now, when Alan Lomax went down to sign Robert Johnson, and then he was dead, Big Bill Brunsey's up in Chicago. He's got a short suit on. He's playing blues like Leroy Carr. Now, Leroy Carr is early blues. Bessie Smith is early blues. It's urban blues with a band that's come out of jazz. That's what Big Bill Brunsey's recording. Big Bill Brunsey then rushes down to the south, takes his suit off, puts the white shirt on, put the overall on, sticks the straw out the mouth, and comes in doing Delta Blues. That is what everybody does. When Blind Lemon Jefferson got signed, he played what they wanted to hear, which was Delta Blues. But he was a busker. These musicians would play everything.
Yeah, and that's the story of music, you know. Like, so when punks come along, they fucking rip up their jeans and have ripped their t-shirts and whatnot, you know.
Yeah. And like the Stranglers said to me, the Stranglers started off as a covers band. They were doing weddings.
Right.
And punk happened. Well, let's have a go at that. And that's what they did. And this is always so. I go back to the beginnings of jazz with all these things going. It must have been like that. And then you try and look for that. You go, no, it doesn't work like that. It's black people invented jazz, and I object to the terminology. I don't mind it being called black music. I don't have a problem with that. I do that. I've done it all my life. What it is when you want to go and look at the history. That's what it is. When you want to go and look at the history, you start to read. And you go, the Creoles were on one side. They were a highly trained musician. They could read and they could play these very uptight marching music that was really popular in New Orleans. So you got that there. The Creoles are there. But the Creoles are getting demoted. They're getting pushed down. You know, in 1860, they're in orchestras. Now they're pushed down. And they're having to do music. And these upstart blacks who can't read music, right? And there's been this big influx of marching instruments, clarinets, all that, because of some war that happened. So they're flooded. They're all cheap. So the black people could actually buy it. So they're trying to play it, but they're playing it out of their heads. The Creoles are looking down on them. But because they're playing it out of their heads, they start to do what every musician does this. If you get a kid and they're trying to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, they can't quite play it, they will jazz it up.
Yeah.
And that's what the black musicians were doing. And it wasn't African, it wasn't this. It was an amalgam of jazzing it up. It came from minstrelsy, it came from the church, it came from classical music, it came from a whole host of stuff, you know. And within the minstrel tradition, you've got things like comedy songs, which actually goes back to vaudeville, which goes back to music hall, of people going, "Wah." That's an English thing. And the reason why the original Dixieland jazz band that had a hit was because Living with Stable Blues, they're doing animal noises. And people are going, "Oh, that's horrific. I can't believe it's like punk rock." Right?
Improvised music.
The black musician, nobody knows, I'm only guessing. The black musicians were the ones who were doing that, but it wasn't some ancient thing from back in Africa. That right? They were too creative for that. It's like, what is, you know? It's like they get brought over in 1619. They descend down, right? You know, it's like they're there playing stuff, and somehow, yeah, there's something there. There's something there. Like me, like my mom's from India, Calcutta. You know, give me a sitar, I can play it. And that's 2 generations back, not 20. It's a joke. Oh, sorry, I can't, what am I supposed to do? Just not say this? I can't see how it works. I cannot see how it works. I just cannot.
What makes someone an improvised musician, or just I learned something by rote musician?
Everybody improvises. If you have a classical training, if you have a European classical training, like the Creole musicians, you sight read, and that's a technology. So you can sit and play your marching music. And we got to understand that marching music in New Orleans in say 1860s, 1870s was very uptight. What's that guy called? There's a black New Orleans bandmaster. What's his name? And he was recorded in 1914. Before original Dixieland Jazz Band. It's incredible when you listen to it. And he does a track in 5/4 in 1914. Right? Now it's New Orleans jazz, but it's so uptight. It just sounds like British jazz bands, brass bands. That's what it sounds like, very orchestrated. But every now and then it swings a little bit. Right? Now I think that's coming from all sorts of places. But swing is not. That's got nothing to do with jazz swing. That comes into jazz later on. You know. And so if you listen to the what's that Louis Armstrong track that starts off now that's coming in, I think, from Spain. That's Jelly Roll Morton. That's the Spanish tinge. So it's coming from Latin America. Now, I've had arguments that go, no, it's coming from Africa. It came in through the Seminole. I've been all the way through this, and I'm going, yeah, it could do. It could be that. I'm not trying to argue it. I would love it for the black influences are in there. The African influences are in there. Right? But the black African influences are like 5%. Right? The people who made it were mostly black, without a doubt. But these genius black musicians made it not out of African music. They made it out of everything that was around them. And it was a work of genius because it wasn't like folk music, because this lit a fire and went all over the world. And by 1925, there was jazz groups all over the world. And I understand why that was. You know, and it's because it's an integrated music form. It opens its arms to everybody. It's not a music form that puts up the shutters and goes, we're black music. It's not that. You could describe it as black music. I understand the argument, you know, that in America, it's, you know, I'm going on for ages now. I was, you got me on the hot course.
Your dinner's getting cold.
Your dinner's in the dog.
Oh, now. I mean, this bit can't. I mean, this can't go on now, can it? Because I've promised myself never to go back to the black.
So just a slight detour. When did British sort of like colliery bands and working class bands sort of start happening? What?
Industrial Revolution. So they were part of the union movement, I think. You know, when you had the Industrial Revolution, then you had like coal collieries. That's where they started off, and then they'd have a brass band. Now, I've played in brass bands at one point, and someone told me why it was brass instruments more than anything else. I think it's got something to do with the fact that they can be made in these industrial places. They're made out of metal. I don't know. You know, it's that stuff. That is really where New Orleans. That's where jazz is coming from.
So that predated jazz, right?
Oh,
Yeah,
right. Oh, yeah. We're talking
yeah.
Industrial Revolution, so we're going back to mid
18
early 1800s. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then that goes back to other groups before that. It is fascinating. I just wish you could have a proper conversation about it, because the problem with this is we don't actually know, because America was an awfully racist country and they couldn't be bothered documenting any of this stuff. You know, that's the bottom line. I used to say to my students, they go, when was recording invented? And they go, I don't know, it was 1860, 1870. When did they decide to record some jazz groups? 50, 60 years later, they recorded everything else. They know they'd recorded bird calls, you know, they'd done everything. Bits of Shakespeare. They had never thought of recording any jazz groups. You know, it should have stayed some weird colloquial thing, but there's some, I'm trying to get at, I want people to go, oh my God, Andy's right. There's something really weird about jazz. What is it why did it take off and take over the whole world and invent the music industry? What was it about jazz that did that? Right? Because the blues, all those early blues artists, they're jazz artists. You know, Charlie Patton, that's 1927. You know, Robert Johnson's 1934. The first is Mamie Smith, is Bessie Smith, it's Leroy Carr, urban blues, played by a jazz group that sounds the same. And Louis Armstrong's on those records. He's on Bessie Smith records. It's just jazz.
So isn't the answer to that, though, that, like you're saying, the marching bands were very uptight, and then you've got all the history of Western art music up to then is like ultra uptight. And it's like, okay, well, here's a music form that's not uptight, that kind of, you know, anybody can have a go. And if you make a mistake, we'll just make it again and we'll call that improvisation.
And that's been the theme of tonight. We've come back to that over and over again. It's this punk thing, isn't it? It's the democratization of music that allows people with other voices to come in and have a different angle, and that changes it and shifts it. And then once that's happened, the virtuosos come in and they virtuoso it, and it's incredible. And you get this incredible period of the
and the capitalist machine comes in.
Yeah.
And so you have this, and so the machine immediately begins to codify it, and the whole thing starts to ossify. You know, it becomes rigid because that's what the machine wants.
And then someone like John Lydon comes along, who is a genius, genius, and he brings something to it which isn't Steve Howe or Bill Bruford or Alan Holdsworth. He brings something else into it, and it changes it. He has a different vision, and it opens up those voices again, and that's what John Lydon did. And it was him that did it. He did it in a certain way. And one of the things that's come out of tonight is that he did it very specifically in England, because there's this weird relationship between American rhythm and blues, rock and roll, and Englishness, and that seems to be and it's probably because the language is the same. It's all about new voices. That's what the civil rights movement was about. It was about going, wonder what these people have got to say. What have gay people got to say? I don't know, we don't like them. Well, why don't we listen to what they've got to say? Right? And you end up with a situation that I am being told to shut up, you shouldn't be saying this, you shouldn't be allowed to do this, and all that type of stuff. And why? Because they believe that their moral position is absolute.
Is superior,
Yeah, and that was how... that's how intelligent people justified slavery. That's how intelligent people justified killing the Jews. That is the evil in society. That is the evil. And when you say capitalism ossified, I don't think it's capitalism. Capitalism is being very great for people on the whole. You know, I would rather be in a capitalist country than anywhere else. I can't think of any non-capitalist countries I want to go and live in. So I've got no problem with captivity, but it does ossify, and it ossifies because it becomes ideological. So when you look at the elites now that are running everything, they're not on the right. The people who are running Facebook and and Amazon and all that, it's what I am countering is, and this sounds like a right-wing talking point, but what I'm countering is the establishment view. I worked in a college. I know what the establishment view is. The establishment view is that everything, you have to put your race and your gender on every single form that you do. You have to tick the box. And I was like, why?
And yeah, so